Welcome back to History Bedtime Stories, where we uncover the fascinating tales that shaped our world. I'm your host, and tonight, we're embarking on an extraordinary journey through time, one that spans over 5,000 years and touches every corner of human civilization. Tonight's story isn't about kings or battles, though it has influenced both. It's not about gold or precious stones, though it has been valued more highly than either. Tonight, we're telling the remarkable tale of a humble plant that has been humanity's companion through millennia, cannabis, and its incredible journey as medicine from the ancient world to our modern age. So settle in, and let me take you on a journey that begins in the mist-shrouded mountains of Central Asia, travels through the great empires of antiquity, survives the dark periods of prohibition, and emerges into our modern scientific age with secrets that are still being unlocked today. Our story begins not in a laboratory or pharmacy, but in the wild, windswept steppes of Central Asia, sometime around 10,000 years ago. Picture, if you will, our early human ancestors, hunter-gatherers moving with the seasons, their survival dependent on their intimate knowledge of the natural world around them. In these ancient lands, where modern-day Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Western China meet, grew a remarkable plant. Cannabis sativa, though our ancestors didn't know its scientific name, was immediately recognizable by its distinctive serrated leaves, its sturdy stalks, and its peculiar, resinous flowers that seemed to shimmer in the mountain sunlight. But how did humans first discover the medicinal properties of this plant? Archaeological evidence suggests multiple pathways of discovery. Perhaps it began with accidental exposure. Early humans seeking shelter in areas where wild cannabis grew might have inhaled smoke from naturally occurring fires. Or perhaps it was through careful observation of animals. Ancient peoples were keen observers of nature, and they would have noticed when sick animals sought out specific plants for healing. The first intentional use of cannabis as medicine likely occurred around 8000 BCE, making it one of humanity's oldest medicines. Archaeological sites in Central Asia have yielded evidence of cannabis seeds and plant matter in burial sites, suggesting that even in death, these early peoples believed in the plant's protective and healing powers. The shamans and medicine people of these early communities would have been the first to systematically explore cannabis's properties. In the harsh environment of the steppes, where winter temperatures could plummet to deadly lows and summer brought its own challenges of drought and disease, any plant that could ease pain, reduce inflammation, or calm anxiety would have been invaluable. These early practitioners discovered that different preparations of the plant produced different effects. The seeds, when crushed and mixed with animal fat, created a nutritious paste that could sustain travelers on long journeys and help mothers maintain their strength during childbirth. The leaves, when dried and burned, produced a smoke that could ease respiratory ailments, a crucial discovery in a world where pneumonia and bronchitis were often death sentences. But perhaps most importantly, they discovered that the resinous flowers of female plants, when prepared correctly, could serve as a powerful painkiller and anti-inflammatory agent. This discovery would prove revolutionary, as pain management was one of the greatest challenges facing early medical practitioners. The knowledge of cannabis medicine didn't remain isolated in Central Asia. As human populations migrated and trade routes developed, this precious knowledge traveled with them. By 6000 BCE, evidence of cannabis cultivation and use appears across a vast swath of territory, from the Caucasus Mountains to the Hindu Kush, from the Altai Mountains to the Tibetan Plateau. Each culture that encountered cannabis adapted its use to their specific needs and incorporated it into their unique medical traditions. The nomadic tribes of the Eurasian steppes developed portable preparations that could be carried on long migrations. mountain peoples created cold weather preparations to combat frostbite and joint pain caused by extreme cold. Desert dwellers found that cannabis could help with the dehydration and heat-related illnesses common in their harsh environment. This period of discovery and adaptation laid the foundation for everything that would follow. The basic preparations developed during these prehistoric times, tinctures, salves, smoking blends, and edible preparations, would remain largely unchanged for millennia, a testament to the effectiveness of these early medical innovations. As we move forward in our story around 5000 BCE, we begin to see the emergence of more sophisticated civilizations, and with them, the first written records of medical knowledge. But the oral traditions that preserved cannabis medical wisdom were already ancient by this time, passed down through countless generations of healers and shamans. The transition from prehistoric to historic times marked a crucial turning point in our story. The invention of writing aloud for the preservation and transmission of medical knowledge on an unprecedented scale. The first written medical texts would begin to appear in various civilizations, and cannabis would feature prominently in many of them. In ancient Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, cuneiform tablets dating to around 3000 BCE contain some of the earliest written references to medicinal plants, including cannabis. The Sumerians, who inhabited this region, called cannabis azala and described its use for treating various ailments including female troubles, eye problems, and as a general pain reliever. The sophistication of Sumerian medicine was remarkable for its time. Their physicians understood the importance of proper dosage, timing of treatment, and the combination of different medicinal plants to enhance therapeutic effects. Cannabis was often combined with other plants like willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, poppy, for additional pain relief, and various aromatic herbs that may have helped with absorption and palatability. Sumerian medical texts also provide some of the earliest descriptions of what we might recognize today as drug interactions and contraindications. They noted that cannabis should not be given to pregnant women in late pregnancy, advice that aligns with modern medical recommendations, and that the dose should be adjusted based on the patient's size, age, and constitution. The knowledge developed in Mesopotamia didn't remain confined to that region. Trade routes that connected Mesopotamia to Egypt, India, and other emerging civilizations carried not just goods, but also medical knowledge. Cannabis seeds and prepared medicines traveled these ancient highways, along with the knowledge of how to cultivate and prepare them. In ancient Egypt, cannabis found a particularly receptive culture. The Egyptians were master pharmacists, renowned throughout the ancient world for their medical expertise. The dry climate of Egypt was perfect for preserving both cannabis and the papyrus texts that described its use. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE but likely copied from much older texts, contains detailed medical instructions including the use of cannabis for treating inflammation. The Ebers Papyrus, another crucial Egyptian medical text, describes cannabis preparations for treating sore eyes, administering enemas, a common Egyptian medical practice, and easing the pain of childbirth. Egyptian physicians were particularly innovative in their preparation methods. They developed a technique for creating what they called divine smoke, cannabis combined with frankincense and myrrh, burned in special censers and inhaled by patients. This method was believed to not only treat physical ailments, but also to connect the patient with the healing powers of the gods. The Egyptians also created some of the first topical cannabis preparations. These salves and ointments were made by grinding dried cannabis flowers with various oils and waxes. Honey was often added, both as a preservative and because the Egyptians believed it enhanced the healing properties of other ingredients. Archaeological analysis of jars found in ancient Egyptian tombs has confirmed the presence of cannabis residue, along with other medicinal substances. But perhaps most remarkably, the Egyptians developed quality control methods for their cannabis medicines. They understood that the potency of cannabis could vary significantly based on factors like growing conditions, harvest timing, and preparation methods. Egyptian medical papyri contain detailed instructions for testing cannabis preparations to ensure consistency and effectiveness. The Egyptian approach to cannabis medicine was holistic, recognizing that healing involved not just the body but also the mind and spirit. Cannabis was often used in conjunction with other healing practices, including massage, meditation, and rituals designed to promote spiritual well-being. This integrated approach would influence medical traditions throughout the Mediterranean world. As Egyptian influence spread throughout the ancient world, so did their medical knowledge. Greek physicians who studied in Egypt brought cannabis knowledge back to their homeland, where it would be further refined and systematized. Roman merchants who traded with Egypt carried both cannabis products and the knowledge of their use throughout their vast empire. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the ancient world, in China, an independent tradition of cannabis medicine was developing that would prove to be one of the most sophisticated and enduring in history. Chinese civilization has one of the world's oldest continuous medical traditions, and cannabis has been part of that tradition from the very beginning. The legendary Emperor Xin Nung, who according to Chinese tradition lived around 2700 BCE, is credited with discovering the medicinal properties of hundreds of plants, including cannabis. While Xin Nung may be a mythical figure, the medical text attributed to him, the Xin Nung Ben Chao Jing, or the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, is very real and represents one of the most comprehensive early pharmacological works ever created. In this text, cannabis is described as one of the superior substances that can be taken regularly without harm and that promote longevity and vitality. The Chinese approach to cannabis medicine was remarkably sophisticated, recognizing that different parts of the plant had different medicinal properties. They distinguished between the seeds, called huamaran, which were used primarily as a nutritional supplement and gentle laxative, the leaves, called ma yi, which were used for treating malaria and other fevers, and the flowers, ma hua, which were used for their psychoactive and pain-relieving properties. Chinese physicians developed the concept of cannabis having both yin and yang properties. It could be both stimulating and sedating, both warming and cooling, depending on how it was prepared and administered. This understanding led to the development of numerous different preparation methods, each designed to emphasize specific therapeutic properties. One of the most important Chinese contributions to cannabis medicine was the development of precise dosing protocols. Chinese medical texts contain detailed instructions for calculating doses based on the patient's constitution, the severity of their condition, and the specific preparation being used. They also recognized the importance of timing, noting that cannabis medicines were most effective when given at certain times of day and in relation to meals. The Chinese also pioneered the use of cannabis in surgical procedures. The legendary physician Hua Tuo, who lived during the Han Dynasty around 200 CE, is said to have developed a cannabis-based anesthetic called mefizin, literally cannabis boiling powder, that allowed him to perform complex surgeries. While the exact composition of this anesthetic remains unknown, historical accounts describe patients remaining unconscious and pain-free during procedures that would otherwise have been unbearably painful. Chinese cannabis medicine wasn't limited to treating physical ailments. Traditional Chinese medicine has always recognized the interconnection between physical and mental health, and cannabis was used to treat what we might today recognize as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Chinese physicians understood that chronic pain and illness could lead to mental distress, and they used cannabis not just to treat the physical symptoms but also to restore emotional balance. The Chinese tradition of cannabis medicine also emphasized prevention over cure. Cannabis preparations were commonly used as general health tonics, taken regularly by healthy individuals to maintain vitality and prevent disease. This preventive approach was particularly important in a society where medical care was often inaccessible to common people, and maintaining good health was primarily an individual responsibility. As Chinese influence spread throughout East Asia, so did their cannabis medicine traditions. Korean and Japanese medical texts show clear Chinese influence in their descriptions of cannabis use. Vietnamese and Thai traditional medicine also incorporated Chinese cannabis knowledge, adapting it to local conditions and needs. In India, cannabis medicine developed along yet another unique path, one that would profoundly influence spiritual and medical practices throughout South and Southeast Asia. The Indian subcontinent may have been one of the first places where cannabis was deliberately cultivated rather than simply harvested from wild plants. And this agricultural innovation led to the development of more potent and consistent medicine. The Atharvaveda, one of Hinduism's most ancient texts dating to around 1200 BCE, refers to cannabis as one of the 5 sacred plants and describes its use in religious ceremonies and medical treatments. But it was in the Ayurvedic medical tradition that cannabis medicine reached perhaps its highest level of sophistication in the ancient world. Ayurveda, which literally means knowledge of life, represents one of the world's oldest and most comprehensive medical systems. Cannabis, known in Sanskrit as Vijaya, meaning victory, held a special place in this system. Ayurvedic physicians recognized cannabis as a powerful medicine capable of treating a wide range of conditions. But they also understood that its power required careful application and respect. The great Ayurvedic physicians like Charaka and Sushruta, who lived around the 1st century CE, wrote extensively about cannabis medicine. Their texts describe dozens of different cannabis preparations, each designed for specific conditions and constitution types. They understood that cannabis could affect different people in dramatically different ways, and they developed detailed classification systems to match patients with the most appropriate cannabis medicines. Charaka's writings describe cannabis as useful for treating digestive disorders, respiratory problems, pain conditions, and mental disturbances. He provided detailed instructions for preparing cannabis medicines, including how to enhance their effectiveness through combination with other herbs and how to minimize potential side effects through proper preparation and dosing. Sushruta, who is often considered the father of surgery, described the use of cannabis in surgical procedures and wound care. His texts include instructions for creating cannabis-based anesthetics and antiseptics, as well as preparations for promoting wound healing and preventing infection. The Ayurvedic approach to cannabis medicine was highly individualized. Practitioners assessed each patient's constitution, prakriti, and current state of balance or imbalance, vikriti, before prescribing cannabis medicines. They recognized that what worked well for one patient might be inappropriate or even harmful for another, and they adjusted their treatments accordingly. Indian cannabis medicine also made important contributions to our understanding of tolerance and dependence. Ayurvedic texts contain some of the earliest descriptions of how regular cannabis use can lead to diminished effects over time, and they provide detailed guidance for preventing and managing these issues. They recommended periodic breaks from cannabis treatment, rotation between different preparations, and the use of complementary therapies to maintain effectiveness. The spiritual dimension of cannabis use in India cannot be overlooked. Unlike many other ancient cultures that viewed cannabis primarily as a medicine, Indian traditions recognized it as both a medicine and a spiritual sacrament. The god Shiva was particularly associated with cannabis, and devotees used it not just for healing, but also for achieving altered states of consciousness that were believed to bring them closer to the divine. This spiritual use of cannabis wasn't separate from its medical use, but was seen as complementary. Ayurvedic physicians understood that healing involved not just the body but the entire person, including their spiritual well-being. Cannabis was seen as particularly effective for treating conditions that had both physical and spiritual dimensions, such as chronic pain that led to depression or anxiety disorders that manifested as physical symptoms. The influence of Indian cannabis medicine spread far beyond the subcontinent. As Buddhism spread throughout Asia, it carried with it medical knowledge that included cannabis applications. Islamic physicians who encountered Indian medicine during the medieval period incorporated many Ayurvedic concepts into their own medical systems. European travelers and traders who visited India brought back knowledge of cannabis medicine that would later influence Western medical practices. As our journey continues, we find ourselves in the ancient world of Persia, where cannabis medicine encountered and merged with another sophisticated medical tradition. The Persian Empire, at its height stretching from India to Greece, served as a crucial bridge between Eastern and Western medical knowledge. Persian physicians, particularly during the Sassanid period from 224 to 651 CE, made important contributions to cannabis medicine. They were among the first to systematically study the differences between various cannabis strains, recognizing that plants from different regions and growing conditions could have dramatically different medicinal properties. The Persian text known as the Bunda-Hishan describes cannabis as one of the 10,000 healing plants created by Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism. This religious sanctioning of cannabis use meant that Persian physicians could study and use the plant without the religious restrictions that limited medical research in some other cultures. Persian contributions to cannabis medicine included advanced distillation techniques that allowed them to create highly concentrated cannabis extracts. They also developed methods for standardizing cannabis preparations, ensuring that medicines produced in different locations would have consistent potency and effects. The Persian approach to pain management using cannabis was particularly advanced. They understood that different types of pain, acute versus chronic, inflammatory versus neurological, responded better to different cannabis preparations and dosing schedules. Persian medical texts contain detailed protocols for treating various pain conditions, including what we would today recognize as arthritis, migraine headaches, and neuropathic pain. Persian physicians also made important observations about the interaction between cannabis and other medicines. They noted that cannabis could enhance the effects of certain other pain medications while potentially interfering with others. These early studies of drug interactions were remarkably sophisticated and showed a level of medical understanding that wouldn't be matched in the Western world for many centuries. The fall of the Persian Empire to Islamic conquest in the 7th century CE marked another important transition in our story. Islamic civilization would become the next great curator and developer of cannabis medicine, building upon Persian, Indian, Greek, and other traditions to create one of the most advanced medical systems the world had yet seen. The Islamic Golden Age, roughly spanning from the 8th to the 13th centuries, was a time of unprecedented scientific and medical advancement. Islamic physicians had access to medical texts from across the known world, and they synthesized this knowledge into comprehensive medical systems that included sophisticated use of cannabis. The great Islamic physician Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, who lived from 854 to 925 CE, wrote extensively about cannabis medicine. His texts describe cannabis as useful for treating epilepsy, severe headaches, and various forms of mental distress. He was among the first physicians to describe what we might today recognize as the entourage effect, the idea that cannabis is most effective when its various compounds work together rather than in isolation. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, perhaps the most famous of all Islamic physicians, included detailed descriptions of cannabis medicine in his monumental work, The Canon of Medicine. This text, completed around 1025 CE, would become one of the most influential medical works in history, used as a standard medical text in European universities for over 600 years. Avicenna's descriptions of cannabis were remarkably accurate and detailed. He described its effects on different organ systems, its interactions with other medicines, and its potential for both therapeutic and adverse effects. His work included some of the first systematic descriptions of cannabis dosing, preparation methods, and quality control procedures. Islamic physicians also made important contributions to our understanding of cannabis cultivation for medical purposes. They recognized that the medicinal quality of cannabis could be improved through careful selection of seeds, optimal growing conditions, and precise timing of harvest. Islamic agricultural texts from this period contain detailed instructions for cultivating medical cannabis that rival modern growing guides in their precision and comprehensiveness. The Islamic tradition of cannabis medicine also emphasized the importance of the physician-patient relationship. Islamic physicians understood that cannabis, because of its psychoactive properties, required careful monitoring and guidance. They developed detailed protocols for introducing patients to cannabis medicine, monitoring their response, and adjusting treatment as needed. Perhaps most importantly, Islamic physicians maintained and transmitted the cannabis medical knowledge of previous civilizations while adding their own innovations. When Islamic armies conquered vast territories, they encountered local medical traditions and often incorporated valuable knowledge into their own systems. When Islamic scholars translated Greek and Roman medical texts, they preserved cannabis medicine knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. The Crusades, despite their destructive nature, also served as a conduit for medical knowledge. Crusaders who were treated by Islamic physicians experienced cannabis medicine firsthand and sometimes brought this knowledge back to Europe. The famous military orders like the Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller, who maintained hospitals and medical facilities, became familiar with Islamic medical practices including cannabis use. As we move into the medieval period in Europe, we find a complex and often contradictory relationship with cannabis medicine. On one hand, European physicians had access to translated Islamic and Greek medical texts that described cannabis as a valuable medicine. On the other hand, the Christian Church viewed anything associated with altered states of consciousness with suspicion, seeing it as potentially demonic or heretical. Despite these religious concerns, cannabis medicine did find its way into medieval European practice, though often in modified forms and under different names. The Anglo-Saxon medical text known as the Lacnunga, dating from around 1000 CE, contains recipes for cannabis-based medicines, though it refers to the plant by various folk names rather than its classical designation. Medieval monasteries, which served as centers of medical learning and practice, maintained medicinal gardens that often included cannabis. Monastic physicians justified the use of cannabis by emphasizing its role in treating physical ailments while downplaying or ignoring its psychoactive properties. They developed preparations that maximized cannabis's anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving properties while minimizing its psychoactive effects. The famous medieval physician and mystic Hildegard of Bingen, who lived from 1098 to 1179 CE, wrote about cannabis in her medical works. She described it as useful for treating stomach ailments and various forms of pain, though she warned against its overuse and recommended it only for severe conditions. Medieval European physicians also encountered cannabis through their interactions with Islamic medicine during the Crusades and through trade relationships with the Islamic world. The medical school at Salerno, one of medieval Europe's most important centers of medical learning, taught courses that included Islamic medical knowledge, including the use of cannabis. However, the European approach to cannabis medicine during this period was generally more conservative than that found in Islamic or Eastern traditions. European physicians tended to use smaller doses, combine cannabis with other herbs to moderate its effects, and reserve its use for only the most severe conditions. The medieval period also saw the development of new preparation methods that were uniquely European. Medieval physicians developed techniques for incorporating cannabis into alesh and wines, creating medicines that could be stored for long periods and that masked the taste of the cannabis. They also created cannabis-infused oils and salves that could be applied topically for pain relief. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, European attitudes toward cannabis medicine began to evolve. The Renaissance emphasis on empirical observation and the rediscovery of classical texts led to renewed interest in cannabis as a medicine. Renaissance physicians had access to more complete versions of ancient medical texts, and they began to experiment more freely with cannabis preparations. The development of printing in the 15th century also played a crucial role in the transmission of cannabis medicine knowledge. Medical texts that had previously been available only in hand-copied manuscripts could now be printed and distributed widely, making detailed information about cannabis medicine available to physicians throughout Europe. Nicholas Culpeper, the famous 17th century English herbalist, included detailed descriptions of cannabis in his influential herbal guides. His work, The Complete Herbal, published in 1653, describes cannabis as useful for treating inflammation, gout, tumors, and various other conditions. Culpeper's work was widely read and helped to legitimize the use of cannabis in English medicine. The Renaissance period also saw the beginning of more systematic study of cannabis medicine. Physicians began to keep detailed records of their cannabis treatments, noting which preparations worked best for which conditions and documenting both positive and negative effects. These early clinical observations would form the foundation for more modern approaches to cannabis medicine research. As European powers began to establish colonies around the world, they encountered new cannabis traditions and varieties. Spanish colonizers in the Americas discovered that indigenous peoples had their own sophisticated cannabis medicine traditions, developed independently from Old World practices. Portuguese traders in Africa encountered cannabis varieties and preparation methods that were unknown in Europe. British colonizers in India were exposed to the sophisticated Ayurvedic cannabis medicine tradition. These cross-cultural encounters led to an unprecedented exchange of cannabis medicine knowledge. European colonizers brought Old World cannabis varieties and preparation methods to their colonies, while indigenous and traditional medicine practitioners shared their own cannabis knowledge with the newcomers. This global exchange of knowledge would profoundly influence the development of modern cannabis medicine. The colonial period also saw the beginning of commercial cannabis cultivation specifically for medicinal purposes. European colonizers established cannabis plantations in various colonies, not just for fiber production but also for creating medicinal preparations to send back to Europe. This commercialization of cannabis medicine production led to improvements in cultivation techniques and quality control methods. However, the colonial period also marked the beginning of legal restrictions on cannabis use in some parts of the world. Colonial authorities, concerned about the social and political implications of cannabis use among colonized populations, began to implement legal restrictions that would eventually evolve into broader prohibition policies. As we enter the 18th and 19th centuries, we find cannabis medicine at a crossroads. Scientific understanding was advancing rapidly, leading to a more sophisticated understanding of how cannabis worked and how it could be used most effectively. At the same time, social and political forces were beginning to align against cannabis use. setting the stage for the Prohibition era that would dominate much of the 20th century. The 18th century Enlightenment brought new scientific rigor to the study of cannabis medicine. Physicians began to use more systematic methods to test cannabis preparations, documenting their effects with unprecedented precision. The development of chemistry as a science also led to the first attempts to identify the active compounds in cannabis responsible for its medicinal effects. Carl Linnaeus, the great Swedish botanist who developed the modern system of biological classification, formally classified cannabis in 1753, giving it the scientific name Cannabis sativa that we still use today. This formal classification helped to standardize botanical and medical discussions of cannabis and facilitated more precise scientific study. The French physician Jacques-Joseph Moreau, working in the mid-19th century, conducted some of the first systematic studies of cannabis's effects on the human mind. His work, Du Haschisch et de l'aliénation mentale, on hashish and mental alienation, published in 1845, represented one of the first attempts to understand cannabis's psychoactive effects from a scientific perspective. Moreau's research was motivated by his interest in treating mental illness. He believed that by studying how cannabis affected normal consciousness, he could better understand the nature of mental disorders and potentially develop new treatments. While his theories were not always correct by modern standards, his methodical approach to studying cannabis effects was groundbreaking. The 19th century also saw significant advances in cannabis preparation and standardization. Pharmacists developed new extraction methods that produced more consistent and potent cannabis medicines. The development of alcohol-based tinctures allowed for precise dosing and long-term storage of cannabis medicines. In 1839, British physician William Brooke O'Shaughnessy published a landmark paper describing his experiences with cannabis medicine during his time in India. O'Shaughnessy had studied traditional Indian cannabis medicine practices and had conducted his own experiments with cannabis preparations. His paper, published in the journal Provincial Medical and Surgical Transactions, introduced Victorian physicians to the sophisticated cannabis medicine traditions of India. O'Shaughnessy's work was particularly important because it provided detailed clinical observations of cannabis use for treating a wide range of conditions, including cholera, tetanus, epilepsy, and chronic pain. He also provided detailed instructions for preparing cannabis medicines and guidelines for dosing, making it possible for other physicians to replicate his results. The success of O'Shaughnessy's work led to widespread adoption of cannabis medicine throughout the British Empire and beyond. British pharmaceutical companies began producing standardized cannabis preparations, and cannabis became a standard part of the medical arsenal for treating pain, seizures, and various other conditions. In the United States, cannabis medicine gained popularity throughout the 19th century. American physicians, many of whom had been trained in European medical schools where they encountered cannabis medicine, began prescribing cannabis preparations for their patients. The eclectic medical movement, which emphasized plant-based medicines, was particularly enthusiastic about cannabis therapeutics. The United States Pharmacopoeia, the official compendium of drug standards, included cannabis from 1850 to 1942, providing detailed specifications for cannabis preparations and quality standards. This official recognition reflected the mainstream acceptance of cannabis as a legitimate medicine during this period. American pharmaceutical companies also became major producers of cannabis medicines. Companies like Parke-Davis, Eli Lilly, and Squibb all produced cannabis preparations, marketing them for conditions ranging from migraine headaches to menstrual cramps to insomnia. These commercial preparations were often more standardized and convenient than homemade cannabis medicines, contributing to their widespread adoption. The late 19th century also saw important advances in understanding how cannabis worked. While the specific mechanisms of action wouldn't be fully understood until the late 20th century, 19th century researchers made important observations about cannabis's effects on different body systems. They noted that cannabis seemed to have particular affinity for the nervous system and that its effects could be quite different depending on the dose and method of administration. However, even as scientific understanding of cannabis medicine was advancing, social and political forces were beginning to turn against cannabis use. The association of cannabis with certain ethnic and racial minorities in various countries led to increasing social stigma. Immigration patterns that brought cannabis-using populations into contact with non-using populations sometimes led to cultural conflicts and moral panics. The rise of competing pharmaceutical interests also played a role in changing attitudes toward cannabis. As synthetic drugs began to be developed and marketed, pharmaceutical companies had financial incentives to promote their new products over traditional plant-based medicines like cannabis. The development of aspirin, for example, provided an alternative to cannabis for pain relief that could be patented and profitably marketed. Religious and moral reform movements also increasingly targeted cannabis use. The temperance movement, which was primarily focused on alcohol prohibition, sometimes extended its concerns to other consciousness-altering substances, including cannabis. Moral reformers argued that cannabis use led to idleness, immorality, and social decay. These changing social attitudes began to influence medical opinion as well. Some physicians began to express concerns about cannabis use, though these concerns were often based more on moral and social considerations than on medical evidence. The medical literature from this period shows increasing debate about the appropriate role of cannabis in medical practice. The early 20th century marked a turning point in the history of cannabis medicine. The passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act in the United States in 1906 required pharmaceutical companies to list cannabis as an ingredient on product labels, but it didn't prohibit cannabis use. However, this requirement reflected growing government interest in regulating drug use. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 in the United States didn't directly target cannabis, but it established a precedent for federal drug regulation that would later be extended to cannabis. Similar laws in other countries reflected a growing international trend toward drug regulation and prohibition. The reasons for the shift toward cannabis prohibition were complex and varied by country, but common themes included racial and ethnic prejudice, economic competition from synthetic drugs, moral and religious objections, and concerns about social control. The medical benefits of cannabis, which had been widely recognized for over a century, became secondary to these other considerations. Despite growing legal restrictions, many physicians continued to prescribe cannabis medicines well into the Prohibition era. Medical journals from the 1920s and 1930s contain numerous articles describing successful cannabis treatments for various conditions. However, increasing legal restrictions made it more difficult for physicians to obtain quality cannabis preparations, and many began to switch to synthetic alternatives. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 in the United States effectively ended the legal medical use of cannabis in that country, though it remained in the U.S. pharmacopoeia until 1942. Similar laws in other countries had comparable effects, driving cannabis medicine underground and ending decades of legitimate medical research. The Prohibition era, roughly from the 1930s to the 1990s, was a dark period for cannabis medicine research. Legal restrictions made it extremely difficult for researchers to study cannabis, even for legitimate medical purposes. The few studies that were conducted were often limited in scope and focused more on documenting harms than on exploring therapeutic potential. However, Cannabis medicine didn't disappear entirely during this period. Traditional medicine practitioners in many cultures continued to use cannabis despite legal restrictions. Underground networks of patients and caregivers developed their own cannabis medicines, often based on traditional recipes and preparation methods. Patient advocacy groups began to form, sharing information and pushing for legal reforms. The 1960s counterculture movement brought renewed attention to cannabis, though this attention was often focused more on recreational use than on medical applications. However, some researchers and physicians began to question the wisdom of prohibition policies and to call for renewed research into cannabis medicine. The discovery of THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, by Israeli researcher Raphael Mechoulam in 1964 marked the beginning of the modern era of cannabis research. For the first time, researchers could study specific cannabis compounds in isolation, leading to a much more sophisticated understanding of how cannabis worked. Mechoulam's research also led to the discovery of the endocannabinoid system in the 1980s and 1990s. This discovery revolutionized our understanding of cannabis medicine by revealing that the human body has its own cannabis-like compounds and specific receptors for cannabis compounds. This finding provided a biological basis for understanding why cannabis had been effective as medicine throughout history. The discovery of the endocannabinoid system also helped to explain many of the historical observations about cannabis medicine. The wide range of conditions that responded to cannabis treatment made sense once researchers understood that cannabinoid receptors were found throughout the body, in the brain, immune system, digestive system, and other organs. The 1970s and 1980s saw the beginning of renewed interest in cannabis medicine, driven partly by AIDS patients who found that cannabis helped with appetite loss and nausea caused by HIV medications. Cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy also discovered that cannabis was effective for managing treatment-related nausea and vomiting. These patient-driven discoveries led to increased pressure for legal reforms and renewed research. In 1985, the FDA approved Marinol, a synthetic THC preparation, for treating nausea in cancer patients. While this represented a step forward, many patients found that whole plant cannabis preparations were more effective than synthetic THC alone. The 1990s marked the beginning of the modern cannabis legalization movement. California's Proposition 215, passed in 1996, legalized medical cannabis use in that state and provided a model that other states would follow. This law marked the first crack in the prohibition edifice that had dominated cannabis policy for nearly 60 years. The passage of medical cannabis laws in various states and countries provided new opportunities for research and medical practice. Physicians could once again legally recommend cannabis for their patients, and researchers could more easily obtain cannabis for scientific studies. However, the return of legal cannabis medicine also revealed how much knowledge had been lost during the Prohibition era. Many traditional preparation methods had been forgotten, quality control standards needed to be redeveloped, and physicians needed to be retrained in cannabis medicine practices. The early 21st century has seen an explosion of interest in cannabis medicine, driven by advances in scientific understanding, changing social attitudes, and increasing recognition of the failures of prohibition policies. Modern research has validated many historical uses of cannabis while discovering new therapeutic applications. Researchers have identified over 100 different cannabinoids in cannabis, each with potentially different therapeutic properties. They have also discovered that cannabis contains hundreds of other compounds, including terpenes, flavonoids, and other phytochemicals that may contribute to cannabis's therapeutic effects. This discovery has led to renewed interest in what researchers call the entourage effect. the idea that cannabis compounds work together synergistically to produce therapeutic benefits. Modern cultivation techniques have also allowed for the development of cannabis strains with specific therapeutic profiles. Growers can now produce plants high in CBD, cannabidiol, but low in THC, providing therapeutic benefits without significant psychoactive effects. Other strains are being developed to optimize specific cannabinoid ratios for particular medical conditions. The development of new delivery methods has also expanded the therapeutic potential of cannabis medicine. Vaporization allows for rapid onset of effects while avoiding the potential harms of smoking. Sublingual tinctures provide precise dosing and avoid the digestive system. Topical preparations allow for localized treatment without systemic effects. Modern research has confirmed many of the historical uses of cannabis while identifying the biological mechanisms responsible for these effects. Cannabis's effectiveness for pain relief, for example, is now understood to result from its interaction with cannabinoid receptors in the brain and spinal cord that are part of the body's natural pain processing system. The anti-inflammatory effects of cannabis, recognized by ancient physicians, are now known to result from the modulation of immune system function through cannabinoid receptors on immune cells. Cannabis's effectiveness for treating seizures, described in historical texts from various cultures, is now understood to result from its ability to stabilize electrical activity in the brain. Research has also revealed new therapeutic applications that weren't recognized in historical cannabis medicine. Cannabis has shown promise for treating neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, conditions that weren't well understood in historical periods. Cannabis compounds may also have anti-cancer properties, though this research is still in early stages. The modern era has also brought new challenges to cannabis medicine. The development of highly potent cannabis products has raised concerns about potential adverse effects that weren't issues with historical cannabis preparations. The commercialization of cannabis has led to marketing claims that sometimes exceed the scientific evidence. Quality control remains a significant challenge in modern cannabis medicine. Unlike historical periods when cannabis medicine was often prepared by skilled traditional healers, modern cannabis products are often produced by commercial operations with varying levels of expertise and quality control. Patients and physicians must navigate a complex marketplace of cannabis products with limited standardization or regulation. Despite these challenges, the revival of cannabis medicine represents one of the most remarkable chapters in medical history. A medicine that was used successfully for thousands of years, then banned and forgotten, has returned with renewed scientific validation and expanded therapeutic potential. The story of cannabis medicine also reflects broader themes in medical history, the tension between traditional knowledge and modern science, the influence of social and political factors on medical practice, and the importance of keeping an open mind about therapeutic possibilities. The fact that cannabis medicine survived prohibition and has emerged stronger than ever speaks to its fundamental therapeutic value. Modern research is also revealing the sophistication of historical cannabis medicine practices. Ancient physicians may not have understood the biochemical mechanisms of cannabis action, but they clearly understood how to use the plant effectively. Many modern discoveries about cannabis medicine are actually rediscoveries of knowledge that was common among traditional healers. The dosing protocols developed by ancient Chinese physicians, for example, often align remarkably well with modern dosing recommendations. The preparation methods used by Egyptian physicians have been shown by modern analysis to optimize the extraction of therapeutic compounds. The combination therapies used by Indian Ayurvedic physicians demonstrate an understanding of synergistic effects that modern researchers are just beginning to appreciate. This historical knowledge is proving valuable for modern cannabis medicine development. Researchers are studying traditional cannabis preparations to identify potentially effective combination therapies. Traditional dosing protocols are informing modern clinical trials. Traditional cultivation techniques are being adapted for modern commercial production. The global nature of historical cannabis medicine is also relevant to modern developments. Cannabis strains and preparation methods from different cultures are being combined in new ways, creating therapeutic possibilities that didn't exist in any single historical tradition. A modern cannabis medicine might combine genetics from African and Asian cannabis varieties, prepared using techniques derived from multiple traditional systems. The role of individual variation in cannabis response, recognized by historical physicians like those in the Ayurvedic tradition, is also gaining recognition in modern medicine. Researchers are beginning to understand how genetic differences between patients affect their response to cannabis medicines, leading toward more personalized approaches to cannabis therapeutics. The importance of set and setting, understood by traditional healers who used cannabis in ceremonial and therapeutic contexts, is also being recognized by modern medical practitioners. The environment in which cannabis medicine is administered, the expectations of the patient, and the guidance provided by healthcare practitioners all influence therapeutic outcomes. Modern cannabis medicine is also grappling with questions that were addressed differently by historical practitioners. The relationship between cannabis's therapeutic and psychoactive effects, for example, was often seen as inseparable by traditional healers who viewed consciousness alteration as part of the healing process. Modern medicine generally tries to separate these effects, seeking therapeutic benefits without consciousness alteration. This difference in perspective has led to the development of CBD-based medicines that provide some therapeutic benefits without significant psychoactive effects. However, research is also suggesting that the psychoactive effects of cannabis may themselves have therapeutic value for conditions like PTSD, depression, and anxiety disorders. The spiritual dimension of cannabis use, recognized by many traditional cultures, is also being reconsidered by some modern practitioners. While medical cannabis is generally approached from a purely secular perspective, some researchers and clinicians are exploring the potential therapeutic value of cannabis's consciousness-altering effects when used in appropriate therapeutic contexts. The social justice aspects of cannabis medicine are also gaining recognition. Many of the communities that preserved cannabis medicine knowledge during the Prohibition era were disproportionately targeted by drug war policies. As cannabis becomes legal and commercialized, there is growing recognition of the need to ensure that these communities benefit from the legal cannabis industry. The environmental aspects of cannabis cultivation are also receiving renewed attention. Traditional cannabis cultivation methods were often more sustainable than modern commercial operations, and there is growing interest in developing cultivation practices that minimize environmental impact while maximizing therapeutic value. The future of cannabis medicine looks remarkably bright. Research is accelerating, with studies exploring new therapeutic applications, optimal dosing protocols, and innovative delivery methods. The discovery of the endocannabinoid system has opened up entirely new areas of research, including the development of synthetic cannabinoids and drugs that modulate the body's own cannabinoid system. Personalized medicine approaches are being developed that could optimize cannabis therapy for individual patients based on their genetic profile, medical history, and therapeutic goals. Advanced cultivation techniques are producing cannabis varieties with specific therapeutic profiles that weren't possible with traditional breeding methods. New delivery technologies are also expanding the possibilities for cannabis medicine. Nanotechnology is being used to improve the bioavailability of cannabis compounds. Sustained release formulations are being developed that could provide consistent therapeutic effects over extended periods. Targeted delivery systems are being designed that could deliver cannabis compounds to specific organs or tissues. The integration of cannabis medicine into mainstream healthcare is also advancing. Medical schools are beginning to include cannabis medicine in their curricula. Professional medical organizations are developing guidelines for cannabis prescription and monitoring. Insurance companies are beginning to cover cannabis medicines for certain conditions. However, significant challenges remain. Federal prohibition in many countries continues to limit research and access. Quality control and standardization issues need to be addressed. Healthcare provider education needs to be expanded. Stigma and misinformation about cannabis continue to create barriers to patient access and medical acceptance. The regulatory framework for cannabis medicine also needs further development. Unlike conventional pharmaceuticals, which are typically single compounds with well-defined effects, cannabis medicines are complex mixtures of compounds with multiple mechanisms of action. Traditional pharmaceutical regulatory approaches may not be well suited to evaluating these complex botanical medicines. International cooperation is also needed to advance cannabis medicine research and access. Different countries have different approaches to cannabis regulation, creating barriers to research collaboration and patient access. Harmonization of cannabis medicine policies could accelerate research and improve patient outcomes globally. Despite these challenges, the trajectory of cannabis medicine development is clearly positive. Each year brings new research findings, new therapeutic applications, and expanded patient access. The knowledge base that was nearly lost during the Prohibition era is being rapidly rebuilt and expanded. The story of cannabis medicine also offers important lessons for how we approach other traditional medicines. Many plant-based medicines used by traditional cultures may have therapeutic value that hasn't been fully explored by modern science. The cannabis experience suggests that maintaining an open mind about traditional medical knowledge could lead to important therapeutic discoveries. The importance of preserving traditional knowledge is another key lesson from the cannabis medicine story. Much of the traditional knowledge about cannabis medicine was lost during the Prohibition era and is only slowly being recovered. Other traditional medical systems may face similar threats from modernization, globalization, and cultural disruption. The role of patient advocacy in medical progress is also highlighted by the cannabis medicine story. Much of the progress in cannabis medicine over the past several decades has been driven by patients and their advocates rather than by medical professionals or pharmaceutical companies. This grassroots approach to medical reform may be a model for addressing other medical needs that aren't being met by conventional healthcare systems. The cannabis medicine story also illustrates the importance of evidence-based medicine while acknowledging the limitations of current evidence standards. While rigorous scientific research is crucial for understanding how cannabis works and how to use it safely and effectively, the current research infrastructure may not be well suited to studying complex botanical medicines with multiple active compounds. New research methodologies may be needed to fully evaluate cannabis medicine and other plant-based therapeutics. Traditional clinical trial designs that test single compounds for single conditions may not be appropriate for evaluating complex cannabis preparations that may have multiple therapeutic targets and mechanisms of action. The importance of considering social and cultural factors in medical practice is another lesson from the cannabis medicine story. Medical treatments don't exist in isolation but are embedded in social, cultural, and political contexts that influence their acceptance and effectiveness. Understanding these contexts is crucial for developing effective medical interventions. The cannabis medicine story also highlights the dynamic nature of medical knowledge. What is considered standard medical practice in one era may be considered obsolete or even harmful in another era. Maintaining humility about current medical knowledge and remaining open to new discoveries and approaches is essential for medical progress. As we look toward the future, cannabis medicine appears poised to become an increasingly important part of the medical toolkit. Research is likely to identify new therapeutic applications, optimize existing treatments, and develop new cannabis-based medicines. Integration into mainstream healthcare will continue to expand, providing patients with better access to cannabis therapies. The development of personalized cannabis medicine approaches could revolutionize treatment for conditions like chronic pain, epilepsy, and mental health disorders. Advanced cultivation and processing techniques could produce cannabis medicines with precise therapeutic profiles. New delivery methods could improve effectiveness while minimizing side effects. The potential for combining cannabis with other therapies also offers exciting possibilities. Cannabis might be used to enhance the effectiveness of conventional medicines, reduce their side effects, or provide therapeutic benefits for conditions that don't respond well to conventional treatment. International harmonization of cannabis policies could accelerate research and improve global access to cannabis medicines. As more countries legalize medical cannabis, there will be increased opportunities for international research collaboration and knowledge sharing. The commercial development of cannabis medicine will likely continue to expand, with pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology firms, and specialized cannabis companies all contributing to research and development. This commercial interest could accelerate the development of new cannabis medicines while also raising concerns about ensuring patient access and preventing excessive commercialization. Education of healthcare providers about cannabis medicine will be crucial for realizing its full therapeutic potential. As the evidence base for cannabis medicine expands, medical schools, residency programs, and continuing education programs will need to incorporate this knowledge into their curricula. Patient education will also be important for ensuring safe and effective use of cannabis medicines. Patients will need to understand how cannabis medicines work, how to use them safely, and what to expect from treatment. Healthcare providers will need to be prepared to provide this guidance and support. The integration of traditional knowledge with modern research will likely continue to yield important insights. Traditional preparation methods, dosing protocols, and therapeutic approaches may inform modern cannabis medicine development while modern research validates and refines traditional practices. As our journey through the history of cannabis medicine comes to an end, we can see that this remarkable plant has been humanity's companion through every stage of our medical development. From the earliest shamanic healers of Central Asia to the most advanced modern research laboratories, cannabis has consistently demonstrated its therapeutic value. The story of cannabis medicine is ultimately a story of human ingenuity, persistence, and hope. Despite political opposition, social stigma, and legal prohibition, the therapeutic value of cannabis was never truly forgotten. Traditional healers preserved the knowledge, patients sought relief despite legal risks, and researchers continued to investigate despite obstacles. Today, as we witness the renaissance of cannabis medicine, we can appreciate both how far we've come and how much we still have to learn. Modern science has validated many traditional uses of cannabis while revealing new therapeutic possibilities. We understand the biological mechanisms of cannabis action in ways that historical physicians could never have imagined. Yet we also recognize that traditional healers understood aspects of cannabis medicine that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. The holistic approach of traditional medicine, which considers the patient's entire constitution and circumstances, may be more appropriate for cannabis therapy than the reductionist approach often used in modern medicine. The future of cannabis medicine will likely involve a synthesis of traditional wisdom and modern knowledge. Ancient preparation methods may be refined using modern technology. Traditional dosing protocols may be validated and optimized using modern research methods. The holistic approach of traditional medicine may be integrated with the precision of modern medical practice. As cannabis medicine continues to evolve, it's important to remember the lessons of its history. Medical knowledge is not fixed but constantly evolving. Social and political factors can significantly influence medical practice. Traditional knowledge systems may contain valuable insights that aren't immediately apparent to modern science. The humility to learn from traditional practices, the courage to challenge conventional wisdom, and the persistence to pursue promising therapeutic approaches despite obstacles are all essential for medical progress. The renaissance of cannabis medicine demonstrates that valuable therapeutic options can emerge from unexpected sources, and that maintaining an open mind is essential for medical advancement. The story of cannabis medicine also reminds us that healing is about more than just treating disease. Throughout history, cannabis has been used not just to cure illness, but to promote overall well-being, enhance quality of life, and help people cope with the challenges of human existence. This broader understanding of healing may be one of the most important lessons that cannabis medicine can teach modern healthcare. As we conclude this remarkable journey through 5,000 years of cannabis medicine history, we can appreciate how a simple plant from the mountains of Central Asia has touched virtually every human culture and contributed to the healing traditions of the world. From ancient shamans to modern scientists, from traditional healers to contemporary physicians, generations of practitioners have recognized and utilized the therapeutic potential of cannabis. The Prohibition era, which lasted for much of the 20th century, represented an unprecedented interruption in this continuous tradition of cannabis medicine. For the first time in human history, legal restrictions prevented sick people from accessing a medicine that had been safely and effectively used for millennia. This interruption had tragic consequences for countless patients who could have benefited from cannabis therapy. The current renaissance of cannabis medicine represents not just a return to historical practices, but an advancement beyond what was previously possible. Modern science has revealed the biological basis for cannabis's therapeutic effects, leading to more precise and effective treatments. Advanced cultivation techniques have produced cannabis varieties with therapeutic profiles that surpass anything available to historical physicians. Yet this advancement also brings new responsibilities. As cannabis medicine becomes more widely available, we must ensure that it is used safely and effectively. We must develop appropriate quality controls, educate healthcare providers, and create regulatory frameworks that protect patients while allowing for continued research and development. We must also learn from the mistakes of the Prohibition era. Social prejudice, economic interests, and political considerations should not be allowed to override medical evidence and patient needs. The therapeutic value of cannabis should be evaluated based on scientific evidence, not social attitudes or political agendas. The global nature of cannabis medicine also requires international cooperation and understanding. Different cultures have developed different approaches to cannabis therapy, and this diversity of knowledge represents a valuable resource that should be preserved and shared. International collaboration in cannabis research could accelerate progress while ensuring that the benefits of cannabis medicine are available to patients worldwide. As individual patients, healthcare providers, researchers, and policymakers, we all have roles to play in the continued development of cannabis medicine. Patients need access to accurate information and quality products. Healthcare providers need education and training in cannabis therapeutics. Researchers need resources and regulatory support for conducting studies. Policymakers need to create frameworks that balance patient access with public safety. The story of cannabis medicine is far from over. In fact, we may be at the beginning of the most exciting chapter yet. As our understanding of the endocannabinoid system expands, as new therapeutic applications are discovered, and as barriers to research and access are removed, cannabis medicine may fulfill its potential as one of humanity's most valuable therapeutic tools. The ancient physicians who first discovered the healing properties of cannabis could never have imagined the sophisticated understanding we now have of how it works. Yet their empirical observations and practical wisdom laid the foundation for everything that followed. Their legacy reminds us that healing is both an art and a science, requiring both rigorous investigation and compassionate application. As we move forward into the future of cannabis medicine, we carry with us the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human experience with this remarkable plant. We have learned from the successes and failures of historical practitioners, from the insights of traditional healers, and from the discoveries of modern researchers. The journey from ancient cannabis to modern medicine is a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the enduring quest for healing. It reminds us that valuable knowledge can be found in unexpected places, that traditional wisdom deserves respect and investigation, and that the pursuit of healing is one of humanity's most noble endeavors. In closing, as you drift off to sleep tonight, consider the remarkable journey we've taken together, from the windswept steppes of ancient Central Asia to the modern research laboratories of today. Think about the countless healers, patients, researchers, and advocates who have contributed to our understanding of cannabis medicine. Their stories remind us that medical progress is not inevitable but requires dedication, courage, and persistence. The renaissance of cannabis medicine offers hope not just for the patients who may benefit from cannabis therapy, but for the broader future of medicine itself. It demonstrates that valuable therapeutic options may exist in traditional knowledge systems that haven't been fully explored by modern science. It suggests that the integration of traditional wisdom with modern research methods may be the key to medical advances that benefit all of humanity. Sweet dreams, and may the ancient wisdom of cannabis medicine inspire us all to approach healing with both scientific rigor and compassionate understanding. The story continues, and each of us has a role to play in writing the next chapters of this remarkable tale of human healing and hope. The plant that began its journey with humanity in the mountains of Central Asia thousands of years ago continues to reveal its secrets and potential. As we've seen throughout history, cannabis medicine adapts and evolves with human knowledge and needs, always offering new possibilities for healing and hope. The future chapters of this ancient story are still being written, and they promise to be just as remarkable as those that came before. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of cannabis medicine. Until next time, this has been another episode of History Bedtime Stories, where the past comes alive to illuminate our present and inspire our future.